Thank you for joining us tonight for our QTT. My name is Nikki Smith. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a programming partner here at Inclusive Communities. And before we start, I do want to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the Native and Indigenous people who lived and took care of the land that most of us gather on tonight, that belong to the Umaha, Ponca, Pawnee, Oto, Missouri, Santee, Dakota Sioux, Kansas, Iowa, Cheyenne, and Winnebago people. We honor with gratitude and pay our respects to all Native and Indigenous people. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Omaha Table Talks. They were initially created in 2003 by the Social Justice Advisory Committee of Catholic Charities of Omaha. And then in 2012, Inclusive Communities took over OTT and kind of shifted them to a little bit larger public discussion over comfort food. So with that being said, since we are on Zoom, feel free to snack or have beverages, maybe if you want your cat with you, whatever you need to feel comfortable tonight. Tonight's conversation is a partnership with Out in Nebraska. We partnered with them a few years ago to start our QTT series. So this is going to be topics that are going to be focused around the LGBTQIA2+ topics. And I will go ahead and let Abbi talk a little bit more about Out in Nebraska, and then we'll finish up some housekeeping things.
Thank you, Nikki. Yes, my name is Abbi. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Out Nebraska. And we are a statewide organization working to celebrate and empower the queer community that lives all over Nebraska. We know that we're not only in the metro areas. That's one of the reasons why this format is so great, because people can join from anywhere. And we are just really pleased to be partnering with the Inclusive Communities. And thank you for being with us tonight in this QTT topic.
Thanks, Abbi. As you can see, we are doing this via Zoom, thanks to lovely COVID. I will tell you that this is actually going to be our last fully virtual table talk. So starting next month, we will be shifting to a hybrid option. So we'll send out more information about that at the end. But if you are interested, next month, July 12th, we will have a hybrid option. The in-person portion will be at Kaneko, and then there will still be a Zoom portion as well. I want to thank our sponsors tonight, the Losh Foundation, Cox Communications, and American Family Insurance. A few housekeeping things, as I'm sure you saw earlier. We are recording the conversation tonight. We will record the panel portion and then the share out portion at the end. But when we break out into the small group discussions, we will not be recording that portion. So we always invite folks to have their cameras on. We love to see your faces, but if that's not an option or you're uncomfortable with that for any reason, feel free to leave your cameras off. We would ask also that you would just mute yourself when you're not talking. But if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We do have Pamela here as an ASL interpreter, and then we also partnered with World Speaks. So we do have simultaneous Spanish language interpretation as well. and as well as closed captioning options. So if you need any of those, go ahead and message Colin, and he can set those things up for you. I think that is it. I'm going to hand it over to Dominic. He is going to be our moderator tonight. He will introduce the panelists and we will get going.
Thanks, Nikki. Hello, everybody. My name is Dominic Green. I use he, him pronouns. I do serve as the Director of Programs and Faculty at Inclusive Communities, but in this position, I'm just going to moderate this conversation. So at this point, I would like to invite the rest of our panel to come on screen. And we'll go into some introductions and jump right into it. So if I can ask that you all introduce yourselves, and then how are you connected to this topic around intersectionality of mental health and the queer community, and what does that mean to you when we talk about that intersectionality? So if we can start with Connor, and then we'll just popcorn it back and forth after that.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Connor Sullivan. My pronouns are he, him. So how am I connected to this topic? I am a case manager at Cedar Shelter in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is an organization that serves youth. I've worked at a group home for youth, and I worked at a psych unit for youth also. So I've worked a lot with youth with mental health concerns, as well as I myself have bipolar disorder. I started going to therapy when I was 15 years old, and I have continued to do so since then. I think that my experiences as my bipolar disorder developed and I finally got a diagnosis, during all of that, really, I grew into loving the field of social work. And so I became a social worker, and here I am. So, yeah.
Awesome. Abby, would you like to go next?
Yeah, let's see if my bandwidth is better this time. I am someone who lives with a chronic mental health struggle or celebration. It could be either. I live with bipolar 2 disorder, and I am a trauma survivor from a series of childhood traumas. And I have been sharing my story of living with mental health issues for more than 10 years, just as a way to sort of help dispel stigma. And I think there are, as in any community, a lot of folks living with both mental health challenges and identities in the LGBTQ community.
Thank you. LaDonna?
Yeah, my name is LaDonna Elk. I use she, her pronouns. So I've lived with mental health my entire life. I didn't realize I had any mental health issues at all until about 5 years ago. But it all made sense when I, got like diagnosed. So now working on myself and like seeing how good it can be, I've actually turned to it as a career. I work for the Mental Health Association of Nebraska, and I run one of our transitional living homes here in Lincoln, and we work with people coming out of incarceration that deal with substance use and mental health issues. So we just use our own lived experience to walk alongside these individuals on their journey back into society, because there's so many barriers put in place there for them. So just, using my own, what I thought was, I thought it was an illness. I thought I was doomed to live a horrible life. And, I really, took pity on myself about it, but now seeing that it's a strength and my brain just works differently than other people's, and that's okay. Not better, not worse, just different. So I'm glad to be here tonight.
I love that perspective. Andira.
Hello, my name is Andira Losh. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I've been involved with out in Nebraska for quite a number of years on the board, volunteering, and doing community volunteering for over a decade here. It's time flies. So I like to be involved, and a big part of that is pulling together supportive community, and that was really helpful for me when I came out. And I think within my community, it's also the local trans group that I've run. Mental health issues are common with the other struggles that we face due to a lot of stigmatization and shame growing up, and that's been something that I've had to think about a lot, is how much of what makes me and my personality and who I am is inherent in me just existing, and how much is conflict with the culture is how people have treated me. So that's it. It's a thing to struggle with, and a lot of reflection, and maybe too much delving inward at times. But in addition to being trans, I also had a really hard time with spelling and math growing up, having a measure of dyslexia and difficulty with particular issues. And people look at ability as a sort of simple issue, but someone can be very capable in one way and have a lot of challenges in another way. And that definitely overlaid with being depressed and having dysphoria and all of those issues at the same time. And yet, for some reason, when you're going through those struggles as a child, people expect you to be able to give a lecture series on your life challenges. So I guess I developed the ability to do that. It's a bit late for those formative experiences that I now pay the therapy bills for, but it's good to grow as a person, and it's good to share with people. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you touched a little bit. I like that you brought that up. When we talk about ability status, a lot of times we think physical disability or ability, and ability also covers that social emotional ability as well. So as we're talking about tonight, this intersectionality around mental health and the queer community, what does that look like to you all as members of both communities? What does that intersectionality, how has that played a part in your lives? Has that looked differently? What does that look like?
I can go first. I think one of the biggest parts of the work that I do in community and with my friends and people around me is, as Abbi had previously said, normalizing the struggles of mental health challenges and destigmatizing, navigating various issues, and addressing stereotypes of what someone who has depression or deals with bipolar disorder, like, we're not the archetypes that come to your mind. We're complex people in many dimensions. So creating I'd say humanizing the issues and making them relatable to people and making people feel not alone in that. I feel like that's the biggest part of the work for me in community interactions.
Love that. Would anybody else like to?
I'll jump in a little bit. This is Abbi, and I always, one of the things I feel that's been difficult in the intersection of mental health challenges and queer identity is that there are folks on the opposition who equate those two things, who feel like having an identity in the LGBTQ community is a mental illness, or that we have LGBTQIA2S plus identities because we experience trauma or because we have some sort of mental health illness. And that, I think, is something for folks who don't live with that issue and who are not members of the community they don't really see that or interact with that kind of opposition about their illness or their identity. So I think that's something that maybe is unique that I've noticed, having both identities.
Thanks, Abby. Connor or LaDonna, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm a big research data nerd. And so when I think about the intersection of LGBTQ plus identities and mental illness and mental health, I really think of the correlation of LGBTQ plus people having a higher rate of mental illness compared to the cishet community. According to the American Psychiatric Association, we are more than 2 times as likely to experience a mental health concern. And that's, I think, why is that? And as a social worker, we're really supposed to look at the person in the environment. And so for a lot of queer kiddos growing up in a toxic environment, not necessarily abuse, but for me, not feeling safe and growing up almost in a hypervigilant state where I feared my safety, physical safety, emotional safety, whether that's bullying or my parents saying something dumb, or those things affect us. And hearing that we are inherently bad and unworthy, we're gonna start to believe that, especially as kiddos, and that sticks with you as an adult. And that trauma of being in that hypervigilant state, that stays in your body, that stays in your mind, and that affects you every day. So I think about LGBTQ plus identities and mental health. That's really what comes to mind, is that that unfairness that that we live with.
Yeah, and I definitely am going to piggyback off of that, because that's my answer as well. It's, we don't, suffer from mental illness because we're gay, but it's the trauma that we experience a lot as children, like Connor just touched on, that lead to this, the mental health struggles that we face for the rest of our lives. Hearing constantly, whether it's from a church or parents, loved ones, society, classmates, whoever, that you're going to hell, or hearing gay slurs, trans slurs constantly, and just feeling like you're not right, like you were made wrong somehow, and you have to suppress that. And that's exactly it. That leads to, depression, anxiety, whatnot later in life. And again, I'm still paying a therapy bill for it. So, the good news is that there is help out there. And I think talks like this are a huge part of that, to just make people feel safe, even if it's in a little Zoom room like this, to start that healing process, just to be a part of something and know that you weren't born wrong, you were perfect the way you are. So that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also on the other side, if you do have mental health challenges, how do we destigmatize the fact that therapy is not a bad thing, and it's a resource and something, a tool to be used to cope? LaDonna, you mentioned an interesting point that I want to touch on. How have your other identities, this goes for all of you on the panel, such as your cultural identities or religious identities, you mentioned faith and religion, backgrounds, how have those backgrounds played a role in your self, I'm going to use the term that we used in our conversation earlier tonight, self-hatred or have you seen or how you have seen yourself as a queer person?
Yeah, so being like raised in the Catholic Church was definitely a struggle. So hearing from, the time I can remember, that, being gay was an abomination and you'll spend eternity in hell for it. So once I realized pretty early on, I knew when I was probably, 8, 9 years old that I was gay. That just internal struggle that it completely messed me up for a lot of years, and actually led to my first suicide attempt at the age of 16, because I just thought I was hearing constantly from people that I cared about that like they didn't know I was gay. So they were saying everything that they actually thought and believed, which to me was complete rejection, total rejection of who I am. So trying to be somebody I wasn't, because not only rejection from people here, but there's this God that apparently cares who I love, and is going to send me to hell, because that was what I fully believed at that age. So that definitely led to a lot of internal self-hatred that lasted a lot of years, until I kind of, just by chance got around some people that were more accepting and kind of said like, look, you don't have to be Catholic. That's okay. You can walk away from that. You're good the way you are. And yeah, that's how that specifically, I had 2 suicide attempts directly related to, the faith I grew up in, being so disproportionate to who I actually was, and just thinking that was, I was doomed no matter what. But as far as just to touch on the other cultural side that you said, as far as like my Native community, like the concept of two-spirit has been around for hundreds, thousands of years. And that isn't necessarily gay, or trans or anything. It's a person that embodies, male and female characteristics. It doesn't mean, there's not really a label to it other than two-spirit. So like when I was in the coming out process, I, kind of just put it out on social media and just hope my family would see it, like my family from the reservation, and they did. And I kind of expected pushback because I wasn't sure how they felt about it, but there was nothing but love and acceptance, because my family up there is very traditional. And in the traditional way of life, that's, it's fine. There's no reason that you should be ashamed of, being a two-spirit, being gay, being, who you are is just fine. So yeah, those were the 2 kind of different other identities that I had very different experiences with coming out.
Thank you for sharing. Would anybody else like to answer that question?
I'd be happy to talk a bit. I think for me, growing up on the other side in a Lutheran church, it wasn't just like the fact of the sermons that took issues with women and homosexuals and like people who have slightly different doctrines. It was also the sort of superiority complex, the sort of unkind environment, the viciousness of it, that makes you feel unwelcome and that you're unsafe. And that really builds as an environment, I think. And in those spaces, we've talked a lot about the negative, hurtful aspects, but also not seeing yourself represented in any way whatsoever is not only damaging, it doesn't give you a foundation. And I come removed a number of generations from my ancestors who immigrated to this country, and it was my parents or their parents who just forgot all of their traditions and where they come from and all of that. And I think that we've lost a lot of our roots, and that's why we're so easily lost in that way. And that's hard. And I think that's what we bring to community coming together, is having that welcoming, accepting, loving space where all peoples are represented and valued and accepted.
So I also grew up Catholic, very, very Catholic. Grew up in a small town, big Catholic family. When I was little, I actually wanted to be a priest, which people were like, oh, that's so cute. But it was because I knew I was gay and that I would never marry a woman. And that was my only way out without having to come out. Growing up, hearing that you are broken and in need of fixing, that you are inherently bad, that you need Jesus to fix you, that you are not whole by yourself, is extremely damaging to me. And still paying the therapy bills, yeah, the tagline. I think that we've been told all of these things, not even in just the religious community. I grew up in a really small town, and not having that representation and all that kind of stuff, we're just not given the opportunities to see ourselves or feel ourselves or talk about what we're experiencing. I think that was big for me growing up, is like, I wanted so bad to go to my parents because I told them everything and say, I'm struggling with, like, I think I like boys, but like, if I were to ever say that, what would their reaction be? Like, I have no idea. And so that fear of rejection and all that kind of stuff, it's a lot for a kid to go through. Yeah.
Yeah, during our earlier conversation, our prep conversation, we were talking about this, and I shared a little. Personally, myself, I'm a son of a pastor. Pastor's kid, grew up in a small town, Nebraska, all over the state. And my dad never preached against or anything that would have led me to believe that there was not an acceptance there, or my family, but just from the rhetoric of society, the news, everything that we're socialized around religion, specifically Christianity, is anti who I knew I was as a gay person. Yeah, that does lead to a lot of anxiety at the least around what does it look like to come out, what does that acceptance. And it wasn't until very late in high school years that after we had moved to Omaha and I knew, and I had a support system and came out, that I found out that my family was more accepting than I anticipated. And that was, a huge positive for me. But I also, like, it's led to a lot of conversations because I'm still very much a part of my church, and church life is very important to me personally. But it's always a conversation that I don't know, excited is the wrong word, but am okay and comfortable having, is around how does Christianity, how can churches become more of opening, welcoming places so that this sense of trauma and harm that we have talked about can hopefully cease to happen. Because in the sense of what I know and believe, that's not what Christianity is, and or the church. So yeah, I just wanted to feel like I wanted to throw my own experience in there. So Abbi, did you want to add anything to that?
I think my age sort of lends to having a different perspective, or growing up with a different perspective, because I grew up during the AIDS crisis, and everywhere during that time period was the rhetoric that it was God's punishment for being gay, that people were dying of AIDS. And even younger, as a younger person, like really dating myself, I'm in my mid 50s. So like, I remember Anita Bryant and her crusade in Florida against gay people being predators that were going to snatch up your children. And now I'm seeing that rhetoric coming back around in our oppositional messaging, that rhetoric of gay people as predators and that sort of thing. And it's really disheartening because I'm like, oh, I thought we had gotten past this. But it's back around because it works, because it makes people afraid of us, and that only creates more trauma. And so I don't necessarily think it's any easier as a young person being a member of the community than it used to be, because we just have more hateful messages once again.
Yeah, it's yeah. So how have you all, and this may be different for each of you, and I'm sure it will be different from each of you, but how have you been able to reframe your journey with mental health to be a positive thing, or to look at the positive part of it? And if so, how? So have you been able to, and if so, how? I should have rephrased that question.
I can go first on this one. So I have definitely done that. I also would like to say that I don't think it's necessary for everybody to have to find positive in their struggles. I think that kind of toxic positivity is a bad thing. But so like thinking back to all the things that I've experienced, would I do it all again? I don't know if I can say yes. I honestly, but so growing up, I started cutting when I was around 12 years old, and that lasted until I was around 21. So I was in my adulthood when I was still cutting. So that was like 9-10 years. And I now work with youth who are doing the exact same things that I did when I was a kid, who are experiencing the exact same things that I did when I was a kid. I'm working with kiddos who are teenagers who are coming out to their families and helping them navigate that. And I think that going through what I have has really given me this like empathetic advantage to connect and relate to and get a better mindset and perspective towards those that I am now helping, that I get to walk alongside them with. And I think it's worth it. Like I'm very, very happy with where I am and what I've gone through. Like I'm proud of what I've gone through to get to where I am. And so, yeah, I think that I've definitely reframed it into a positive thing. And I'm really thankful for that. Yeah.
I can go next. I definitely feel like my struggles of the past and trauma and sense of cultural alienation has, as Connor just said, given me that outlet to people in my community. It's given me perspective, and just through that perspective, a way to connect with people. And one of the things that was difficult for me was growing up in that reactionary church and feeling looked down upon, like invisibly, in an odd way as it happens. I left that and I found community and grew out of that and found the connection, and I still have that understanding of what it means to come from that. And just generally the broader systems, how they can be abused or how they can harm people, and is definitely hard to appreciate that going through it. Is very painful, but now I have that understanding of the struggles that other people face, and I can speak to that. And that's really important to be able to do. I think as I talked about normalizing things earlier, we as a species, stories and narratives and considering our lives and those struggles and feeling connected to others are so powerful. And so that's a way to like root you culturally, to get a context and really reach out and help other people to not feel so alone.
Yeah, for me, I definitely have as well. And that all started with getting sober, honestly. I, was just a raging alcoholic for many, many years. So obviously I couldn't really I couldn't face any of the hurt and trauma and everything I'd been through because I was too busy numbing it out. So once I got sober about 6 years ago, then I could finally start feeling the feelings and healing everything that came along with that. So for me, and a big part of that was, doing my recovery work, and then also just finding people and surrounding myself with a really safe support system, because I'd never had that in my entire life. I always had friends, I always had people around, but I never had people that I felt completely safe around, that I could be my authentic self in every sense of the word, and they accepted me and cared about me regardless of kind of how nuts I can be sometimes, we'll say. And yeah, honestly, just doing that part, looking inward, and obviously again, I think therapy is like definitely the tagline here today, was that's also been hugely beneficial, is just again, just learning that I'm not broken. I've just been through a lot of things. I was reacting to things that happened to me in the ways I knew how to react, and those weren't good. And honestly, a lot of my recovery also stems from like peer support as well. That's just it's a positive alternative to like I'm not saying that clinical is bad, but it's just an alternative to like the clinical system. Again, it's just using non-professionals, people that just have their own lived experiences, walking alongside of people in mutual relationships, and just saying like, hey, here's where I'm at. Let's meet in the middle and let's figure this out together. Like, that's just what it is. And that's just what has really worked for me. And being happy where I'm at today and more accepting of myself, which I think that's honestly the key to happiness. So yeah.
I think everyone should do therapy, whether or not they feel like they struggle with a mental health issue, because, right, it's just really this awesome opportunity to gain insight into yourself, and how you process things and how you think about the world. And yeah, it's like ditto to everything people are already saying, and to say that it's just like living with any other chronic health issue, right? Like, I take medication to help me with my mental health issues. I take medication for my high blood pressure, and it's just like the same kind of thing. I know that's not how everyone feels about medication, and I know that that can be a struggle for folks, but it works for me. And it's been a part of how I've come to just, feel like I'm all right.
Yeah, thank you. We are to our end time as far as this panel conversation goes. So at this point, we are going to move into our breakout conversations. We'll be in 2 different rooms, led by our wonderful facilitators, Maria and Holly, where they'll lead you through some questions so that you all can have your own discussions around this topic and your interaction with the mental health and the queer community. We just ask a couple of community agreements. So those are making one diva, one mic is how we call it. Just proper turn sharing, turn taking. When others are speaking, make sure that you are listening to them and not talking over them. Vegas twist, that is our twist on the Vegas rule, or the rule in Vegas, where if somebody does decide that they feel comfortable enough to share their personal stories, just like some of us have already tonight, we ask that those stories in those breakout rooms, those stay within amongst those folks that you are with. So the stories stay, but the lessons that you might learn or glean from those stories that might be shared, those should carry with you so that you can use them as your point of growth in this conversation. Making space, taking space. If you are a person who likes to talk, acknowledge that, and that's great. But also maybe make some of that space for folks whose voice is not being heard as much, or might be a little bit more quiet and reserved, and vice versa. If you are more quiet, take that space up. We want to hear from you. Keeping the open mind and curiosity around what others' lived experiences are and points of views. There are multiple truths and reality to this world, and it's not just black and white. And then what does being respectful and just being respectful for each other and to each other. So at this point, Colin's going to send us into our breakout rooms, and we'll see you in about 20 minutes. Hope that you had a great conversation, and would love to hear out what you were talking about. So if I could have somebody from Holly's group, whether that be Holly or somebody else that was designated, to just share out 1 or 2 themes or thoughts that came out of your conversation.
You're stuck with me, Dominic. So we talked about it was eye-opening for some in our group to hear about the negative religious experiences. Not everybody had heard about that or thought about that before. And so they were interested in learning more about that and seeking more lived experiences from members of the queer community, especially from individuals in our group that shared that they worked within a mental health services capacity. So there was an interest in those different perspectives and wanting to hear more. We also talked about the community and what it means to us. And we talked about being validated and that sense of belonging. And again, about how the religious experiences, either positive or negative, can really impact you growing up or currently. So it was a great conversation.
Awesome, thank you. And who would like to shout from our other group?
Is that me? Am I the other group?
Sure.
Yeah, that was from my group. Thank you, Aubrey.
I think we kind of covered a lot. We talked about some like specific parts of the panelist discussion that we really enjoyed. I think what we talked about is that there's a lot of different ebbs and flows to these conversations. Some days you might feel really strong in your identity and other days you might not, and that's okay. Mental health I think that conversation surrounding mental health is improving, but it's not where it should be, and it's still an uncomfortable topic a lot of times. And some mental health discussions like depression, anxiety, those are increasingly easier for some to talk about, but there's still a lot of negative stigma about others. And so it still doesn't always seem like a very safe kind of conversation to have. And so I don't know if I summarized that well enough. I'm currently getting broomed by my toddler, who is brushing me with a broomstick outside. So forgive me if I did not wrap that up well enough.
All good. All right. So we do have a few minutes. If folks maybe have a question they would like to ask of the panel. I know there's one that I wanted to get to that I didn't get to. So I'll start us off with that. How has mental health affected your all's relationships with partners, friends, families, whatever in that category?
I think it's an interpersonal challenge to have mental health struggles, depression, ADHD, just executive function issues, challenges like that. A lot of times people have a hard time parsing out what that means, and there's a lot of negative views and stigmas involved in various difficulties functioning, and it's a lot of people who have traumas that or triggers that can make communication really difficult. One thing I was thinking about as we were talking, I feel like a lot of my life I've told people, go to therapy. And, that used to be like an insult, but I was like, no, not as an insult, like if you're sick, you go to the physician, you go to the therapist because you need that help and support. And that's kind of great that in the community, like, I don't know how normalized that is outside of it, but to be able to suggest therapy to someone and they take it as more than an insult is like, yes, I meant it as a practical thing to do that's good for you.
Yeah, so like with my relationships, I like to make the joke that I just like hang out with people as crazy as I am. And not using that as like a derogatory term. It's like, taking our power back by using that. Because I don't know about you all or y'all, but like I've been called crazy for a lot of my life. And so to just kind of embrace that term now is, I don't know, it feels good. But like along that, then I feel like a majority of people I hang out with also live with mental health struggles, issues, whatever you want to call them. And even my wife does. And it honestly makes it so much easier for us to like understand each other and support each other when we're going through hard times. Because we understand what it feels like to be, the one struggling in the moment. So it's easier to just like embrace the other and just, come at it from that point of view. Whereas, in the past, people I've hung out with or even been romantically involved with that didn't know what it was like. It was just different. It was kind of met with like, why are you acting like this? So it's nice to just kind of be on the same level with people who are equally as understanding and accepting of you. So I guess that's just kind of been I don't think I did it intentionally, but that's just where I tend to hang out with people who are, for the most part, like-minded and understanding. And I think that's just what I've lacked so much in my life that I just kind of gravitated to it naturally once I started, addressing my mental health struggles and whatnot.
I would say for me, being open about whether that be my diagnosis or just what I'm struggling with mentally with the people in my life, using that as a tool to guide how our relationship goes. For example, the other day I was having a conversation with my dad and I was explaining my manic symptoms to him, and it really, it makes sense. I use it as a tool to like explain things. I went to a manic episode a few weeks ago and I texted my boss, who's a therapist, and I described how like what a manic episode, what those symptoms look like in the workplace, just to let her know, hey, like hold me accountable to these. If you see these, let me know. Just some things to look out for, because I do want to do a good job. And using that as a tool to improve relationships. I have an ex-boyfriend who I bought a book for that was called Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder. And he took the time to take notes and ask questions, and he filled that book with notes, and which is one of the most loving things that anybody has ever done for me. And it improved our relationship immensely. But now I hold people to that standard now when it comes to romantic relationships. Like if you're not going to be on that level, goodbye. So it's been beautiful to use it to improve my relationships.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions that you all have or might have for?
I have a question. Partially because therapy is like the word of the night, but I'm wondering if any of you could share about where you feel that mental health services could improve in their services provided, and the nature of how those services are provided. I ask because I'm a counselor, so it's just partially selfish, but also, curious.
I think that therapy can contextualize the challenges that people navigate, and issues of ableism a lot better generally. I know some people are particularly mindful of that, but for example, dyslexia, people see as, oh, that's a disability. It's like, well, it's really, in terms of neurodivergence, it's one way in which the brain works very different from people whose brains don't work that way, and it actually demographically affects a lot of fields that people are in, because that attracts people whose brains work that particular way. So I think we need to stop seeing everything as pathologizing and negative, even traumatic experiences that people have gone through. It needs to be more transformative, and acceptance and self-acceptance. I think that the sort of negative way of looking at people's issues doesn't reveal the truth and the beauty and the resilience of our minds, and how we can grow and what we're capable of. And I think that's really important, and not just in like a toxic positive way, but in a very real, honest way. And I think some therapists get that, and the world would be a better place if that was the norm.
This isn't just specific to therapy, but I think therapeutic interventions, best practices when it comes to prevention of mental health concerns, especially in schools, I think that is where I feel like a lot of resources should be put in. All of us spoke tonight about growing up, and the things that we experienced as children affecting us now today. And I feel like if we could nip that in the bud, like at that age, and grow a culture, grow a society of welcoming differences, whether that be identity in like a queer identity or a mental health identity. I just think that creating a space, creating an environment in schools would really change a lot of things.
I really agree with that, Connor. But to think specifically about therapy, I would caution therapists against clicking that box that says they are LGBTQ culturally competent or culturally aware, that they work with that community because they have that one gay friend, right? and they think to themselves, well, I'm an accepting person. I'm inclusive in my own personal life. So I should be able to say, yes, I will serve that community. I think it takes a little more education and lived experience, or more about the knowing more about the community than just having a few friends. And I know I hear from folks who are looking for therapy, and they're like, yeah, they said they were inclusive, but it really was a bad fit. And sometimes a bad fit just happens in therapy, but really just cautioning folks, don't just check the box on the Psychology Today listing because it's there and you feel like you're inclusive. Like, really do some additional growth as a therapist to serve our community in better ways. And hopefully that's helpful.
And Abby just stole exactly what I was going to say. So I don't really have to add that wouldn't be just repetitive. So thank you for saying that, Abby.
Awesome. Thank you for that great question there. So we are wrapping up, and at that time, it always flies by quickly. But hopefully you are leaving with some thoughts around how you want to continue your own journey and own awareness around this intersectionality, around these two communities. As quick as possible, if you can, I would like to ask the panelists to share one final thing, and that'd be for folks, if they want to become more stronger advocates, stronger allies within both communities or within this intersectionality piece, what would you suggest for folks to do to grow and to become, what's that action step, or what's that action item that you might want to recommend?
I mean, for me, it's all about looking inward and finding that, like, acceptance of yourself. Because once you're secure in yourself and you begin to love yourself, then you can take on the world. But without that, you can yell, you can scream, you can fight, you can do everything. But it seems to be more genuine, and you're more able to listen when you're out there advocating, because what's that old saying, you catch more flies with honey. When you're out there advocating and fighting for change and destigmatization. Wow, I'm glad I got that out. When you're out there doing that, instead of just two opposing people yelling at each other, like we're so good at that, but what does that accomplish ultimately? So being able to sit down and being confident in yourself, and sitting down at that table with people with opposing viewpoints and having an actual discussion. And, that would change, in my experience, that changes more minds than just yelling at each other for, days, weeks, months, years. Just having a real conversation. So, and that just starts from, honestly, it sounds cheesy and I can't even believe I'm saying it, but it all starts from within, and, really accepting yourself for who you are and knowing that you're perfect the way you are.
I can go next. I think this is the first panel that I've been on where I didn't bring up being a lesbian. And I think that it's important that we look at people as multifaceted, and as qualities that are just a part of who we are, right? Like it's every part of us is important, but it's this one part of who we are, and you have to see someone's entirety. And I think that speaks to something that is really important. People get to know me, and there's a certain measure of tokenism in that. It's like, oh, it's the trans person I know, but keep an open mind when you get to know people. Go and meet people that you're unfamiliar with and get to know them, and even people that you do know, keep an open mind as to who someone is. I know when I came out, there were two responses. There were people that were shocked, and there were people that are like, of course, you know, it's obvious. So I think the difference between that is the involvement of the pretense that we know people and that we know who people are. People are complex. There's a lot of aspects of people. We're always changing. So be open to that. Be open to knowing people and learning about people's lives. And especially now in these times, what people's struggles are. A lot of people need to come out. I have to constantly come out. People say, oh, you present feminine, you must date men. And I'm like, no, like, and so, you know, you have to come out because people keep putting you, trying to define you. And so we can all do a little bit less of that with people around us and assuming that we know people.
I'll just say real quickly, everyone has mental health, not just people who have occasional struggles. Everyone has mental health. And so everyone can struggle. So don't be afraid of therapy.
I think a big thing for me has been owning my identity and also not being afraid to call other people out when it comes to both of these parts of our identities. I think that if we're confident in who we are, we're going to change some people's minds, which isn't necessarily our goal. But I found that my presence in being confident in being gay and confident in being bipolar and not being afraid to say that has really challenged some people. Just my being challenges people. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that that's how our community changes, is just by, like LaDonna said, sitting with people, having those conversations, being a community, and just being open, for sure.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to Abbi, LaDonna, Connor, and Andira for being on tonight's panel. Thank you all for being here and participating in this conversation. We greatly appreciate it. Nikki did post in the chat the link to our evaluation form. We always appreciate hearing some feedback on how you think it went, what you'd like us to see us improve on. We are all about receiving that feedback and improving and working on it as well. Also, like Nikki mentioned in the top of tonight's event, our next table talk event is July 12th. At Kaneko. I know it was posted earlier, the link to register for that. If you are interested, we'd love to see you there, either virtually or in person. So we will thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Have a great night.